Welcome to our group's presentation. So today we will be talking about environmental sustainability and resilience, and we'll just be providing suggestions as to how one could implement certain policies to ensure that the country sustains the environment.
Therefore, as part of the introduction towards the topic, we note first and foremost that climate change and the overall population growth are strongly correlated with the socio-economic factors that continue to worsen against the rest of time. As of September 2018, more than half of South Africans said they had never heard of climate change, rural residents having the highest percentage, women and citizens without formal education were particularly likely to be unaware of the phenomenon. In the year 1996, the Green Paper was passed, of course, to kickstart environmental sustainability and resilience in the country. As we know, that developing countries will struggle the most with environmental degradation because the burden rather falls mostly on the poor. With the race against time, the 20th century globalization and industrialization mark a period of unparalleled growth for humanity's population and socio-economic development. Now, in an ideal South African economy where a large population is employed, they can afford medical bills, pay for their waste disposal, or even better, to afford eco-friendly products, or also to be able to pay for water, which is a scarce resource. With this said, we can expect to see a shift in our sustainability efforts. In the next slide, we note or highlight the transport industry in South Africa being one of the greatest emission contributors, followed by electricity industries or the production of electricity using fossil fuel combustions and industrialization processes. In the year since 1970, CO2 emissions have increased by about 90% in the country, contributions about 78% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, which have also increased. The same increase is observed over the population rate, which continues to increase. And that touch figure is the awareness of climate change around the country. The next speaker, Nandi, will be the one to overlook the first factor of climate change being population.
Okay, so it is good to note that South Africa has now reached a stage where the birth rates are decreasing and the population is now stabilizing. However, we have also observed a repetitive trend in the last 20 years of more people moving to urban areas from rural areas. As a result, new properties are being constructed and now there's more infrastructure being built in the economy in order to meet the demand of people moving. However, this demand also outweighs the ability of the government to repair, rebuild, as well as construct the new infrastructure in order to meet that demand. So much so, it has also resulted in a fall of 10% of people now living in rural areas. So there's 10% less people living in rural areas, basically. Now, what does one do in regards to this movement of people? One could suggest that, the government needs to implement certain policies in order to control the population in the country. Therefore, the government should also make sure that their border controls are more stricter by implementing tariffs to limit the amount of people entering the country.
Developing countries like South Africa need to strengthen their economy and society to the impacts of climate change, since the effects of environmental degradation falls mostly on the poor. This can be done by enforcing stricter rules and regulations, like carbon taxes, which South Africa implemented in June 2019, which shifts the cost from society to those companies that are creating the emissions. The current real growth rate for South Africa has contracted by negative 51% for quarter two, and the estimated real GDP rate for 2021 is 2.9%, which is an increase of 1.6 percentage points. A green economy can only be fueled by an increase in household disposable income, as this allows households to afford eco-friendly household equipment, meaning that they have decent jobs. This is the struggle for countries that have low GDP per capita. Next, we will discuss levels of investment.
Compared to other countries in the African continent, the potential attractiveness of South Africa is high. There has been an increase in foreign direct investment over time since 1994 in South Africa. The foreign direct investment grew by 446% to $7.1 billion in 2018, after a sharp decline in 2014. Foreign direct investment in South Africa increased by about 17.3 trillion rands in the second quarter of 2020. President Cyril Ramaphosa aims to attract $100 billion in foreign direct investment by 2023. Without environmental sustainability, South Africa will be at risk of facing the devastating effects of climate change and environmental degradation, which will jeopardize the opportunities of raising this kind of investment by 2023. Thank you.
When we look at the savings levels in South Africa and its changes over time, we see that South Africa has one of the worst attitudes towards savings compared to any other nation, largely due to the unemployment rate of our country sitting around 42%, which shows that most people don't have the extra funds available to save. We see this by the gross savings rate for the country, which was down 5.1% from the first to the second quarter of 2020, much as a result of COVID-19, because most people obviously lost their jobs and had to rely on their savings. What could savings and increase in savings do for us? Well, it could lead to investment-led growth, which assisted China with turning its economy around, whereby the money saved by the citizens are used to spark the economy. Policies that can encourage savings include interest rate incentives. So by encouraging people to save by lowering the interest rates, that will assist them with saving their funds at a bank. Also, by assisting with job creation, we're able to influence and change the levels over time as more people will become employed, assisting in the economy, but also ensuring more people have disposable income available to save.
Environmental education looks to educate people on how the environment functions and how people can manage themselves in a manner that enables sustainability. South Africa's education system is still poor due to the lack of infrastructure required for a quality education. The cost of education differs from province to province, but 69.7% of students in public schools do not pay school fees, and an increase of over 65% in 2018 shows the inability of households to pay school fees if ever required. Chapter 9 of the NDP plans to improve the level of education, training, and innovation. Many countries have used education as a means to raise awareness about the environment and being sustainable. The objective of the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Education is for policies to align in education with sustainable development. Taiwan, for example, introduced the Environmental Educational Act, which looked to ensuring that an environmental education fund is set up and is used for conducting research and compiling teaching material, studying and drafting environmental learning programs for the school. The figure shown denotes the percentage of households in South Africa that do not pay fees. It shows the growing reliance of poor families on non-fee paying schools. This is extremely important as the poor are both the victims and agents of environmental degradation, as they rely heavily on most natural resources in order to survive. Therefore, it is important to promote the learning and understanding of environmental sustainability in underprivileged communities, as the continuous exploitation of natural resources will prove most harmful to them. Environmental education needs to be integrated into the national qualifications framework, with school structures needing to be set up in ways that their curriculums work towards action-oriented environmental education practices. Schools need to create opportunities for students to participate in real-world problem-solving activities with the intentions of helping them develop a sense of ability to bring about changes in their communities.
Over the years, there have been some changes in the labor profile. The number of skilled persons have increased over the years. Even though there have been developments in the labor force over the past 25 years, there are still many challenges that South Africa faces in the labor market, such as an unemployment rate of 23.3%, of which the youth contributes 63.1%. There have also been very little changes in labor force participation. from 57.1% in 2001 to 58.9% recently. The NDP sees skills development as critical. We stand in need of individuals who are proficient and resilient, who will be well prepared to steer us closer to systems that ensure that environmental shocks are combated. South Africa has goals to eradicate poverty, reduce inequality, and grow the economy, and cut unemployment rate to 6% by 2030. Education, training, and innovation are critical to the attainment of these goals. Thank you.
There is a direct and indirect impact on jobs. Jobs rely on the services that ecosystems provide, for example, jobs in agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and tourism. Climate change threatens the provision of many of these vital services, for example, fresh water provision, biodiversity, storm protection, and stock renewal. These negatively affect the economic activities and jobs that rely on them. Among these negative effects is also a reduction in labor productivity. The provision of safe, healthy, and decent working conditions rely on the absence of environmental hazards and the maintenance of environmental stability. The increasing frequency and intensity of various environment-related hazards caused or exacerbated by human activity have already reduced labor productivity between 2000 and 2015. 23 million working life years were lost annually at the global level as a result of such hazards. Effective and sustainable management of the environment is crucial, whereby the transition to a low greenhouse gas economy is expected to lead to a net creation of jobs. Climate change mitigation can keep future adaptation costs down and bring about net employment creation through, along with a substantial reallocation of labor. 3 out of 4 jobs worldwide are heavily or moderately dependent on water. Adaptation measures such as investment in the infrastructure required for the conservation, treatment, and supply of water can increase both the number and quality of jobs across the economy. Climate change adaptation presents various opportunities to address instances of sectoral and occupational segregation, to narrow wage and skills gaps in certain sectors and occupations, to promote inclusive social dialogue, to improve working conditions, and to enhance social protection.
Therefore, with all of the socioeconomic factors mentioned, we see why there isn't much awareness around climate change. Therefore, to see why, we explored Sweden against South Africa, and this is where we thought of 17-year-old Greta Thunberg. Sweden, in action as with their greenhouse gas emissions, they've decreased their CO2 emissions by 25% between the year 1990 and 2015. Behind the reason is that they've married a holistic mindset at local levels, such that their environmental objectives correspond to many of the goals and targets of their 2030 agenda, which integrates every sector and every household. We note and highlight that a green economy can only be fueled by an increase in households' disposable income. Of course, this can translate to households being able to, for instance, afford plant-based diets. Sweden's biofuels account for 34%, that was in the year 2014, which would be a possibility in the future. But because South Africa is largely a dry country, production will likely be located in the southern African regions. Sweden's use of their water waste treatment plants as biogas has helped to reduce their oil dependence by 50% of their biogas being converted to vehicle fuels for their transport industries. Therefore, following slides is our explored policies.
SADC policy and strategy for environment and sustainable development are proposed as those most relevant to sustainable development in the South African situation to accelerate environmentally and economically sustainable growth with greater equity and self-reliance. South Africa should implement the Clean Development Mechanism project, which allows emission reduction projects in developing countries to earn certified emission reduction credits, allowing them to continue to pollute only up to certain limits, which are reduced over time. Energy conservation policies should also be implemented at local levels. Complementary fiscal reforms are needed to broaden the price on carbon to encourage economy-wide efficiency and investments in greener technologies.
In conclusion, some other policy suggestions include, for participation of global environmental efforts for environmental protection agreements should be made to minimize the degradation of environment. For trade policy, environmentally friendly companies, industries, and technologies should be adapted compared to polluting industries. To implement renewable energy resources should be used as they are naturally replenished on a human timescale. For economic incentives, rebates should be given if less pollution, water waste, and land use is generated than the standards given. The government should implement border tariffs to reduce the volume of people entering the country. And the government needs to ensure that the funds that we receive from foreign direct investment is used for job creation.
Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to our group highlight these important matters in regards to environmental sustainability in our country.